Tumblr genders. A BIM gender. A gender which is profound, deep, and infinite. Absor gender. A gender that changes to conform to the genders of those around you. Adam as gender. A gender which refuses to be categorized. Adepto gender. When your gender identity was obtained through your realization of your kin self. Aesthetic gender. A gender derived from an aesthetic. Aether gender. A gender that feels very wide, commanding, breathtaking, and powerful. Affect you gender. A gender affected by mood swings. Agender. Having no gender or a lack of gender identity. The only one so far that even slightly makes sense. Alexi gender. Gender identity which is fluid between more than one gender, but the individual cannot tell what those genders are. A Lewis gender. A gender which is removed from common gender descriptions and guidelines. Ambigender. A feeling of two genders simultaneously but without fluidity. Amore gender. A gender that changes depending on who you're in love with. Ambonic. Identifying as both male and man and female, yet neither at the same time. Amica gender. A gender that changes depending on which friend you're with at the moment. Amor gender. When your gender changes whilst in the presence of an individual to whom you've developed a deep connection for. Androgyny. Feeling in between or a combination of man and woman. Fine! That one's fine. I don't give a fuck anymore. Anessa gender. Physically feeling like a certain gender but feeling more comfortable identifying as another. Angelic gender. A gender found only among angels that is hard to describe to not angels. For Godkin and Angelkin only. I can't even make this shit up. Angenital. The desire to be without primary sex characteristics without necessarily being genderless. Anogender. A gender which fades in and out but always comes back feeling the same. A non-gender. A gender that is unknown to both yourself and others. Antigender. A protein gender which has the potential to be anything but is formless and motionless. Antigender. A gender which can only be described as the opposite of another gender. Anxigender. A gender affected by anxiety. Apagender. A feeling of apathy towards one gender that causes one to have no desire to look further into it. Abconsergender. A gender in which you know what it isn't, but not what it is. Sort of like the gender hiding itself from you. Apogender. A subset of agender in which you feel not only genderless but entirely removed from the concept of gender. Apologender. When you have around 9 different distinct feelings of gender. Aporagender. A gender separate from man, boy, woman, girl, and anything in between while still having a gendered feeling. Aptogender. A gender which feels fitted and secured. Aquarigender. A gender which is fluid between infinite feelings. Archigender. A gender that is ancient and can only be described with words like the old and shit. I don't fucking know. Agender, switching between non-binary genders while feeling particularly associating with one feeling. Arithmogender, a numerical gender. It can range from any number, positive, negative, decimal fractions. Agoggender, a subset of gender fluid within the changes between one's separate genders are the parts of one's genders that have been whatever. Astrogender, a gender that feels bright and celestial. Astrogender, a gender that feels connected to the space. Atmosgender, a gender which is present but unable to be grasped or firmly defined. Autogender, a gender which can only be understood in the context of being autistic, which makes sense because you have to be autistic to think that these things are genders. I'm kidding. I'm sorry, autistic people. That was an insult. I'm really sorry. I'm sincerely apologize to anyone autistic I offended by comparing them to Tumblr gender believers. Autogender, a gender experience that feels deeply personal to oneself. Axogender, when a person experiences two genders that sit on the opposite sides of an axis. Bigender, identifying as two genders. Bigender fluid, being bigender with fluidity. Blizzgender, when you're a fucking blizzard. Yeah, that's a fucking gender now. Boggender, a gender that feels like a swamp. Bordogender, a fluctuating gender experienced exclusively by people with BPD. Boy flux, when one feels mostly or all male most of the time and fluctuating intensifies of male identity, blah blah blah. Brevigender, a subset of gender fluid in which you feel your gender is never stable for long. Cadence gender, a gender that is easily influenced by music. Catogender, a subcategory of polygender identities to have a gender to fall back on. Cadogender, with an E as well. A gender which has been cut away by a traumatic event. Kale gender, a gender that shares qualities with outer space. Cancer gender, a gender as base gender but experiences fluid feelings in tandem with their emotions. Canish gender, a small dog-like gender. Capra gender, a capricious, rapidly changing, untrackable gender. Karma gender, a gender which is poetic and rhythmic in nature. Caste flux, when your level of indifference towards your gender fluctuates. Caste gender, feeling the very concept of gender is unimportant to you. Cave gender, having a trapped or imprisoned gender. Covs gender, for those with depression. One gender when you're depressed, one gender when you're not depressed. What the fuck? What the fuck? I'm still in the letter C. Send gender, when your gender changes between one gender and its polar opposite. Canon gender, a gender identity influenced by your parents. Cento fluid, when you are cento gender and your feelings fluctuate. Cento gender, a non-binary gender with specific masculine or feminine or neutral feelings. Okay, I need a break. This is the end of part 1. Come back for part 2 if you hate yourself enough.